I see no ships. At the Battle of Copenhagen, Horatio, soon to be Admiral Nelson, is said to put his telescope to his bad eye, the one with a patch, when he was sent to signal to retreat. He didn't see what he didn't want to see. After 3 hours of bloody battle, with British and Danish ships anchored within range of each other, firing broadsides, and several running aground, he was in no mood to leave the fight for another day. This week, a Home Office report commissioned by the Home Secretary in the wake of the Southport attack was leaked. It wasn't published. She assures us she rejected all recommendations. The recommendations worry me, but the underlying worldview on which these recommendations were based worries me more. It comes from the Home Office, not the Home Secretary. My understanding is the report was leaked to the Policy Exchange, whose review, extremely confused, is linked in the description. What an apt name! The vast majority of terrorist attacks, relate inquiries, MI5 inquiries, and pretty much any sensible measure of terrorist risk are from Islamic terrorists. This does not mean Muslims are a risk. It means Muslim extremists are the main risk. But the report wants us to look at behaviours, not extremist actions. So it highlights Sikhs, probably the least likely group in the UK to commit any crime whatsoever. It highlights Hindu nationalists. But they exist, and I have plenty of friends who support Modi, and he's often called a Hindu nationalist. Apparently it's because of what happened in Leicester, but I've never seen a coverage that said that was one-sided. It acknowledges left-wing anarchist and single-issue or lassie extremists. I thought that was a drink. Environmental extremism and Hindu extremism as distinct phenomena that counter-extremism policy should tackle. The left may object to the first two. The others might welcome it. I never hear anyone criticise the extreme left. Apparently those with an interest in UFOs and 9/11 conspiracies are likely to be extremist. Or is it that extremists are likely to have an interest in those conspiracies? It's a very different thing. Where do you draw the line? I watch Ancient Aliens because I find it hilarious. Does that make me an extremist? But I don't exclude there being aliens. There's approximately 10,000 million stars in the Milky Way galaxy alone. If we assume that 1% have planets in the Goldilocks zone, and 1% of these have developed life, and 1% of these have developed intelligent life, and 1% of these have survived, and 1% of these have got as far along as us in development, then there's 100 space-going civilizations. Are there? Who knows? We've no proof of it. But it's extreme that I think and hope there's a chance there is some life out there. Does that make me an extremist? Or is it just that I don't like the government makes me one? 9/11 conspiracies. Well, I believe 9/11 happened. A friend of mine was in New York when it happened, and he was pretty compelling, and I watched the planes fly into the towers. But I had a friend who didn't believe an airliner could fold up into a ball and disappear through a window in the Pentagon. He thought it was a missile. But he believed the Twin Towers were felled by planes. Now, is he an extremist? I spoke to an acquaintance recently, and he started asking if I believed in the flat earth. No, I don't, I said. He looked very disappointed, almost surprised. He asked me why, and I was like, remember that time a couple of months ago you went to Spain? If you climbed a tall building in London, can you see that airport in the south of Spain? No, why? Because the earth's curved. I struggle to understand why he actually believes such a bizarre theory, but is he dangerous? Only to a can of beer, maybe. men's rights activists. So we're saying women's rights activists are fine, but men's rights are dangerous. I know men are more violent than women, and don't argue that at all. But is it extreme thing only for males? That seems sexist. I'm sure there are feminists who would discard my thoughts because I'm a man. Good on them, that's their right. Because I believe in something the government hates, free speech. Something the report wants to limit. The groups highlighted a mixture of those with no figurehead, those with no history of violence in the UK, those with no history of violence at all, and those who ceased to exist 10 years ago. Many of these supposed other extremisms simply don't meet the test of causing harm to national security or safety, or even the test of extremism, pretty much by their own acceptance. The Shia versus Sunni conflict isn't extreme, doesn't get a page in the report. Yet Sunni Muslims strong-armed cinemas into cancelling The Lady of Heaven, a Muslim film they didn't approve of. When was the last time that happened? I like Life of Brian. Life of Brian had plenty of priests standing outside cinemas saying it was blasphemy, but they didn't stop people going into the cinema. The report highlights and names Satanist groups who abuse children, but not the R-gangs preying on girls in many British cities. No, that's, as the report said, weaponised by the right wing. Incels, so young frustrated men who struggle with women. I'm not into this stream of thought. I don't really know much about what incels are thinking and saying. I'm middle-aged and I'm old enough to know that I don't understand the workings of the female mind, and I'm sure it goes both ways. I'm sure it's true there are dangerous people with this ideology, the media tells it me regularly, but I'm also sure that saying every single young man who isn't getting any and plays computer games alone in his basement is an incel is like saying all Muslims are extremists. They're not, are they? Reading this section feels like they've taken the behaviours of Islamic extremism and incels, crossed through the words Muslim and Islam, and looked for other people who could possibly correlate. The real threat they want to talk about is the right wing. Two-tier policing is a right-wing conspiracy. No, it isn't. It's always been there. It always will be. Every case is different and interpreted differently. There's subtlety to it. You can always pick examples where it's two-tier. I had left-wing friends who went on marches and clashed with the police. I could tell you they believed in two-tier policing. They just didn't use that phrase. They were a lot more rude about it. Does that make them right-wing? Does that make you right-wing if you think that you've seen examples in the media that don't seem to show the same level of attention, choice to prosecute and guilt? This is a world view that anyone to the right of Keir Starmer is a fascist. Again, EDL get rolled out. I know the EDL claim they weren't right-wing, but I lived near a mosque where they protested, and I thought they were right-wing. I avoided that mosque when there were clashes, and at the very best it was provocative. But they ceased to exist. When was the last time you heard of them, or even heard about them? It's like saying SDLP members. Do they still coordinate? Are they even alive? Right-wingers spread conspiracies, apparently. Well, that sounds like Kamala Harris wrote this report. See how well that did for her in the US election. Spreading misinformation, apparently, is right-wing. The problem is, since the fact-checkers are mainly left-wing, how do you decide what's fact and what's misinformation? The BBC has hardly come out well with their fact-checking service. The pandemic taught us that what's misinformation one week turns out to be mainstream suspicions in a few months and facts a few years later. If you arrest someone for saying the pandemic started from an accidental lab leak during the first month, they're spreading misinformation. But do you wipe this crime when it turns out that most people think it leaked from the lab? The only lab that had that sort of pathogen destroyed all the evidence. When you imprison people for someone saying someone is a Muslim terrorist, and it turns out they got the wrong name, the right religion, and a terrorism, well, it wasn't the motive, but there was terrorist media. Do you reduce the sentence? Well, obviously not if you threatened or attempted to harm people. But you've imprisoned someone for saying something you know to be partly true. And you have more information than they did. Is that where we want to go as a country? What this report tells me is why successive Home Secretaries in the Tory government delivered so few of their promises. They run a department subsumed by the woke left wing. They see no ships, not because they want to win, but because they're scared the truth might cause conflict, discussion, disagreement. Tut-tutting, maybe. Well, ignoring problems doesn't make them go away, it makes them fester. This is not the independent civil service we like to pretend we have, but a socialist version of Sir Humphreys in Yes Minister. I don't believe the Home Office mandarins are stupid, so I have concluded that they are willfully downplaying Islamic extremism and looking to peaceful, disgruntled Sikhs and Hindus, pick-up artists, yes, that's womanisers to you and me, and environmentalists. But there's something rotten in the state of Denmark, and this report gives me a good idea as to the source of this problem.